Good evening, everyone. I'm Doug Elmendorf, Dean of Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome to the Kennedy School and to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. We are very honored tonight to be joined by Governor Jeb Bush. Governor Bush will be delivering the Edwin L. Godkin Lecture, which was established at Harvard 113 years ago to promote the ideals of free government and the duties of the citizen. Governor Bush served, as you know, as governor of Florida for 2 terms, from 1998 to 2007. During his tenure, he urged and implemented significant changes in policy regarding education, taxes, healthcare, natural resources, capital punishment, guns, the government workforce, immigration, and other important issues. After leaving the governorship, he founded and now serves as chair of the Foundation for Excellence in Education, which aims to maximize every student's potential for success and to prepare all students for success in the 21st century. Joining Governor Bush tonight will be Harvard professors Paul Peterson and Roland Fryer. Paul Peterson is the Henry Lee Shattuck Professor of Government and Director of the Program on Education Policy and Governance at Harvard. Among many other activities, he is the editor-in-chief of the journal Education Next, and was a member of the independent panel advising the Department of Education in its evaluation of the No Child Left Behind law. Roland Fryer is the Henry Lee Professor of Economics and faculty director of the Education Innovation Laboratory at Harvard. As you know, his research in education, inequality, and race has been widely published in professional journals and widely cited in the press. We are set for a terrific evening. Thank you all for being here. Thanks in particular to Governor Bush. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dean. Welcome to Harvard.
Thank you.
And thank you for the invitation. About 5 years ago, I got to be a fellow at the Institute of Politics, I think it's called, for a week. It was a mini-me version of that. It was exhausting, hanging out with really smart people all the time for 24 hours a day, interacting with people. It was exhilarating, and this version of it is also exciting. I'm honored to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation. I was thinking about what I would talk about, and I asked my mother, who is kind of the boss of the Bush family, and she said, Jeb, talk about 10 minutes and then get up and let people ask their questions. So in thinking about this, given the prestigious nature of this lecture and what's gone on in our country over the last 50 years, it was about 50 years ago that the war on poverty was launched. And it was probably here where some really smart people in the 1960s decided to lay out ideas about what to do with the fact that in this incredible country, with incredible prosperity, with more opportunities than any country that has ever existed since the beginning of mankind, that there are people stuck in poverty. Fast forward 50 years later, in 2016, this extraordinary country still leads the world in so many ways. We are discovering cures for diseases that were unimaginable just a decade ago. In 10 years' time, all of us will be Uber drivers, not just me. We're changing the world, not just for the 300 plus million people that live here, but we're changing it for the rest of the world. But the challenges that we face today are dramatic, and the challenges of our times need to be addressed. And so I thought I would lay out some ideas about where I think we are. I see Bob Putnam here. 2 books that I've read in the last 3 years that kind of made me even more passionate about the subject of why it is that this dynamic country seems to be sticky at the ends, if you will, where rich people are doing really well, really, really, really well, and poor people, in terms of economics, are probably doing better than people in poverty all around the world, but they're stuck, and the middle is getting squeezed. It helps explain, I think, why our politics why people are so anxious and angry. I can respect the fact that they feel that way because it's real, it's tangible. Declining income, More people in poverty, even though we transfer $1 trillion a year in some form or another to try to support people at the bottom. And in spite of efforts by policymakers, the rich are getting richer. There's no question about it. In fact, the top 10% of income, top 10% of people making income now make 50% of the income. And 20 years ago, that number was less than, was in the 30s. And that seems to be changing each and every day, where the split gets bigger. So what should we do about this? It seems to me that we're stuck in terms of, y'all are going to be leading the world here. Kennedy School graduates seem to migrate towards public policy and leadership positions, and you're going to have a responsibility, I think, to transform our government and our relationship with government to turn it into a dynamic 21st century enterprise so that we can deal with these problems. Any history major here would know that in times of peril in our country, we've always found a way for public leaders to step up, to inspire us, and to challenge how governments work so that we can renew ourselves and move forward again. Can we honestly say that's happening today? Where, Doug, a budget hasn't been passed since, like the millennium. And where even when people agree in Washington, they can't find the ability to say yes. They still have to say no, fearful of someone back home that might challenge them, or for whatever reason. The culture of our political system seems to be not working. So what should we do? Well, I believe there are a couple of principles that would help us. One, I believe America is a bottom-up country, not a top-down country. Now, you can be a liberal and believe in a bottom-up approach. In fact, in the 60s, when they came up with these ideas of fighting poverty, most of the initial suggestions were bottom-up. They were to empower people rather than institutions yet to be formed. And it seems to me if we're going to be successful in the 21st century, being a bottom-up country, why won't we empower people in poverty rather than the institutions around them? I think they've been given their chance. 50 years. The level of poverty dropped in the 1960s for 6 or 7 or 8 years. It dropped pretty precipitously as billions of dollars were invested in poverty programs, and then it flattened out. And it's basically remained the same for the last 2 generations of time. In a bottom-up country, we would trust people to make decisions, important decisions for their families and themselves. We don't assume that people in poverty are stupid. We don't assume that somehow, some way, that they're different, that they can't make the right choice for their children. We don't assume that they don't want to work. We assume the opposite. And when we do that, when we trust people to make decisions for themselves, give them the information to make informed decisions, and give them the financial power that people in the middle and people at the top have, my guess is we'll have a far better result. The second suggestion I have truly relates to trusting people instead of creating massive government programs around them. And this is a place where the debate needs to be deeper and stronger, because we're now at a point where these institutions, I think, are holding us back rather than providing support. They're becoming a ceiling on people's aspirations and changing their behavior and their attitudes about what their future looks like. I kind of yearn for the day of where, I don't know if there's any Europeans here, don't take offense when I say this. I yearn for the day when Europeans would look down their nose at us and say, you Yanks are way too optimistic. I yearn for those days, because if we do trust people and we believe in the future and we empower people in a bottom-up country, we're going to renew ourselves far faster than the top-down driven approaches that now dominate political life. And I hope we have a conversation about that, because I want to convince those that are left of center that the progressive agenda needs to be modified to trust people rather than support institutions that aren't working. And we should have a debate about that. If you think your schools are working, and it doesn't matter that a parent is trapped in a failing school, would just give more money to it, I'd like to make the case that that mom whose child is trapped in a failing school ought to be given the power to go to a school of their choice, because it'll improve all schools when that happens. And if you disagree, fine. But that debate should take place. And what should we do about poverty today? And I'll give you a few suggestions and then we'll have a conversation. First, I believe that high sustained economic growth is better than the new normal. I don't know, this is this terminology that makes me a little nauseous. I hope it does you, young people particularly. The new normal of 1.5% growth. 1.5% growth dooms us. Ask the former budget director what 1.5% growth does in terms of the looming demands on the federal government, particularly because of the $50 trillion of net present value of the obligations of the social contract. 1.5% growth means that we can't sustain that we can't preserve and protect the programs that people are counting on as they go into retirement. 1.5% growth means that people in poverty won't be able to get the first rung of the ladder to grab it and to begin to pursue their dreams. 1.5% growth likely means that the middle class will see declining median income. This should not be a left-right question. If we grew at 2% more than we're growing today, set a goal of 4% or 3.5%, you compound that out over 10 years, in an economy of our size, $19+ trillion, in the 10th year, you create the equivalent of Germany, of incremental economic growth. That's $4 trillion of additional economic activity. No one can tell me that if you do that, you're not going to create prosperity for everybody. Now, how it all divvies up, that's a debate to have. But I can promise you one thing, that debate right now is pretty difficult, isn't it? When we have 1.5% growth compounded out. That debate becomes pretty ornery because people are completely disaffected. High sustained economic growth requires us to bring our tax code into the 21st century, how we regulate in the 21st century. It means we need to reform our legal immigration system to narrow the number of people coming by family reunification and expanding the number of people that can make an immediate contribution so that more people benefit from economic growth. It means a lot of things. But we should have a debate about that and challenge the orthodoxy of our time so that higher growth becomes part of our life again. In fact, I would argue that the aspiration for this country ought to be that we're the first developed country, which is a horrible term. A developed country means the next step is decline. That ultimately, think about it, I mean, the world, civilizations aren't always in their ascendancy. And developed means you're mature, which means the next step is you're not mature, you're moving down. We could be the first developed country to become emerging again. Young, dynamic, aspirational. And that should be the objective of everybody in this country. Rather than the gridlock that we have, higher growth would yield a better result. The second thing that I think we need to do, and this is where Dr. Putnam's work and others is so important, which is people stuck in poverty don't have the community organizations, don't have the networks, don't have the safety nets around them that have historically allowed people to break out of poverty into the middle class. They've been decimated for all sorts of reasons. And smart people need to figure out how do we rebuild community life. It's not a government program. This is the concept of rebuilding the ways that we stay connected with one another. We're isolating ourselves as a society, and that makes it harder to solve problems. The third element of a successful society that is aspirational and is moving up, where you have economic and social mobility, is strong families. And today, particularly people in poverty, the most heroic people in this country are single moms trying to love their children with their heart and soul, stuck in poverty, with failing schools, with little economic opportunity, and where 20% of the babies born in the world today won't know their dad, irrespective of marriage. 20% won't even know their dad. That has never been tried in world history that I'm aware of, and it makes it extraordinarily hard for people to break out, to be able to do what they should have the God-given right to do, which is to aspire to a better life for themselves and their families. And so whether it's tax policy or all other policies, we need to be pro-family again in this country and not assume that somehow that's not important. I know that's politically incorrect. I apologize if I've offended the sensibilities of people, but I truly believe that that's important. We need to have a restorative justice system in this country. Look, guided by my faith and my practice, my experience as governor of the state, I've seen the effects of a criminal justice system that doesn't understand that people need to be given second chances. Particularly in the world we are moving in today, where if you don't get that second chance, you're basically doomed. You can't get a job. In fact, people that are born today in the public hospitals all around Massachusetts and Jackson Memorial in Miami, if we don't change and alter the direction of their life, knowing what we know now, we'll never have a job. So how could it be that someone who has a criminal record is going to be able to get a job today? I think we need to realize that the federal government should not be the end-all and be-all as it relates to criminal justice. That's the proper role of state government, and many states are now applying restorative justice, criminal justice reform to their agendas, left and right. It's actually interesting that in the state level, you do find left-right coalitions. Maybe in Washington, D.C., they could learn from what's going on in the states. A bottom-up country actually shows the way for the federal government to do all sorts of reforms, and this would be one where I think it's important. President Obama has embraced this idea. So have Republicans in Congress. While they can't figure out, even when they agree to do things, I hope that you will urge people across the country to do what's right in that regard. And the final thing that I think we'll probably be talking about, we need a stem to stern radical transformation of our education system. And look, this is hard, because the minute I say something like that, anybody in the education system feels threatened. Well, I apologize in advance. This is a systemic problem. This is not the people in the system that are the problem, but a system that has 13,100 government-run, politicized, unionized monopolies as the governance model for educating millions of children of great diversity is not going to work. It's not going to work. And in fact, I think the results are there for people to see. For those that think we don't spend enough on education, K-12 education, we spend more than any country in the world other than the Benelux countries, which is a half-a-day county, literally. It's a rounding error. All due respect to those great countries, it's not relevant in this conversation we're having today. We spend more per student than any country in the world other than the Benelux countries, and a third of our kids are college and or career ready. Now, if you pass the test and you're college and career ready, and you get to go to a great university like Harvard, this is the most amazing time in the world. This is the most extraordinary time to be alive. Everybody my age in this crowd would yearn to be 21 again. I can promise you that, for all sorts of reasons. But we're on the verge of this incredible time. But if 2/3 of our children have to take remedial work to go to a community college and retake high school reading and high school math, or they don't go at all, and they're not career ready so they can't get a job, who's fooling who? How do we expect as a society to have shared purpose and commonality of interest in the world we're moving towards, where so many young people are not gaining the power of knowledge? And here, above all else, there should be a radical transformation. We should not be tied to convention. All of us should ask the question to ourselves and to leaders across this country, if we weren't doing it this way, how the hell would we do it? And I demand that we have this conversation and start leading a charge of increasing the passion and intensity for education reform. This should not be a left-right issue. This should be the issue of our time. Because I see a future so bright for so many people unless they're stuck in a system that has failed them. And for those that go to these great institutions, they're going to be the leaders of the next generation. I think we all of us have a responsibility to not ignore the fact that a lot of people can't do what you're doing right now. It should be a responsibility of every one of us to demand that we change this, that we empower families to make decisions, that we don't hold back the notions that a school is basically, you're in it for 180 days, you breathe in and out, you have your little butt in the seat, and then you go to the next grade. And that if you're excelling, you're not held back. You reach your potential each and every year. And if you're not learning, that you're pushed along by learning, not by pushed along by chronology. If we change the system where learning is the means, is the variable, the constant, and time is the variable, we will radically change how we educate. And if we do that, this country will lead the world for the next 2 generations of time. It's why I'm here, because you all are going to be the next leaders in this country and in the world. And I hope that you see the power of education reform as part of your agenda for change. Thank you all very much. Hey guys. Orba. Thank you. You want to take this? Was I supposed to be here? I got my embeds from the campaign. It's like a reunion here. Apparently no one's campaigning today or something? Don't you guys have a day job?
So, Governor, I just have a few questions, as Roland does, for you before we open it up to everybody else, which we'll do in a few minutes. And while I was thinking this over, I thought about Abraham Lincoln, who faced a crisis that was even greater than the crisis of our times. But he thought that the United States was an exceptional nation, one whose survival was critical to the world as a whole. And in his second annual address to Congress, he said, "We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth." So was he right? Is this still true?
Yes.
And if so, what's the single, I think you touched on this, but let me ask it again. What is the single most important thing the country needs to do to remain the hope of earth?
I think one of the things that we need to do is to recognize that our politics and our government is a mirror image of us. Now that insults a lot of people, if you think about it. If you know, it's not meant to be an insult, but I think when we see what's going on in our political system and our campaigns and how government works or doesn't work, we push it aside saying, well, that's not me. I'm like smart and commonsensical and I see things going on that are good. This is like a foreign ecosystem that I have nothing to do with. Well, politics is a circus mirror perhaps, but it's a mirror of our culture, and we in our interactions with one another create our culture, and our culture's changed. So I think about this a lot, and you can't change your culture by having go to Congress and pass a bill. We're going to change the culture. That's us. It's happened in the past. The 60s, there was vast cultural changes, some for good, some maybe not so good. The Great Awakening in the 19th century was a time of an extraordinary change where there was a cultural revival in this country that got us back on track. And my hope is that we have a cultural revival that will spark an interest for bigger and deeper reform, where people will be comfortable being engaged and staying involved. That's not, as I said, that's not a single big change in the political realm, but it will change politics if we do have a change in culture. Someone today, Doug, you mentioned Arthur Brooks, I think. He's a friend of the Dalai Lama's. It's an odd couple. Arthur is the CEO of the American Enterprise Institute, one of the leading conservative intellectuals in the United States. And in a gathering like this, His Holiness has probably come here and spoken right here, I imagine. And he was asked, how do you, seeing what's going on in Washington, how do you change it? And his answer was, first, what I do is I pray for my enemies. He's a pretty serious prayerful person. He like 3 or 4 hours to start the day, and for the first 2 hours or first part of that time of reflection, he prays for the government of China. Pretty powerful. I mean, imagine if we in Washington or in our own daily lives prayed for the people that are our adversaries. Used to be done. I bet Abraham Lincoln did it. In fact, if you read The Team of Rivals, he took a lot of incoming and showed humility to bring people together. So that's another change. The culture of civility needs to be restored. And I think it's okay to be warm-hearted. I just went through what was supposed to be a really tough political fight, and I lost, and it was disappointing. But I'm not going to change who I am. I'm not going to be angry. I'm committed to my views, and I fight for my views. But the idea that you're weak if you're warm-hearted, or if you believe that someone that disagrees with you is an evil person, man, we got to stop that. That is just dangerous for our democracy.
Great. Governor, when I grew up, my grandmother used to tell me that if you work hard in school, that you could have everything you want. And as I go around and I talk to kids in K through 12 schools across the country, what they're seeing on TV with the protest and the videos of African American men being shot at by police, they're starting to ask me questions and to question the hypothesis that if you're educated, that things will go well for you, that there's a skill price, that life will be okay. What do we tell them? How are they supposed to believe that there's true meritocracy when every other day they turn the TV on, it doesn't seem that way?
Well, the data reflects that if you get a quality education, you have a much higher probability of having rising income. And work done by Paul, and now the connection between, this is the nerdy answer, and then I'll give you the important part. Tracking students that are successful becoming college and or career ready, which gives them a chance to get a higher education or skills to get a job. In that tracking, we do see higher income. And we see it amongst Hispanics, African Americans, white. It's not a question of race or ethnicity. The problem is we have a lot of failing schools and people are trapped. And then you combine that with a legitimate belief that if you're African American particularly, you're going to have challenges that are different than what other people have. So how do we solve that? Part of it is we need to revolutionize the education system. So, I bring up something that's kind of controversial. Colin Kaepernick is, kneeling for the national anthem. I, for one, I'm troubled by that, but I respect his right to do it. But all the sports commentators that are talking about this say, well, we're going to have a conversation about it. Well, we don't. We just say we're having a conversation. I've not heard one tangible thing said on television about this issue, about how we can solve it. And I think we truly do have to have a set of policies that change it. One of them I brought up, which is changing sentencing guidelines. We shouldn't have minimum mandatory sentences at the federal level for nonviolent crimes, because that verifies the system, this belief that the system is rigged. I think we need education reform. I think there needs to be a recognition that whether it's expanding the earned income tax credit or focusing on true welfare reform, there needs to be support for families economically so they have a chance to rise up as well. I don't know. I'm not going to bring up your study, but there is research.
Run out of here just
yeah.
Quite yet. Yeah.
Well, what the part of Roland's study that was so groundbreaking was that in terms of the interactions, the first initial interactions with police and African Americans, it was, I don't know what the standard deviation stuff, I can't say that in English, but that it was significant. But the violent element was not as significant, but the interactions were. So dealing with this mistrust on both sides has to be the answer. If you assume that someone who's African American, irrespective of their background, is more likely to commit a crime, those interactions are going to be more hostile. Even if there is a reticence to use a gun to shoot, which is what the controversial part of your study, the part that was maybe more important was that there is greater interaction, and in all other elements of that interaction, it's not good. So there's a lot that needs to be done in this regard. There's no question about it.
So, Governor, you when you were in office, the children in the state of Florida improved more on the National Assessment of Education Progress than the students in any other state in the country. That was over that 8-year period. It's not continued to go up since you left office. We can treat you as a random shock to the system, and you shocked it forward. And
yeah, it didn't.
So, I mean, and you've really stayed with this issue over the years, and you spoke to it again. Now, here in Massachusetts, we've done well, but now we have, and our charter schools have done very well here. But now we're talking about expanding the charter schools, and I know you had a lot there. So, can you tell me? You talk about totally reforming the educational system, but is it possible that the charter school could totally reform, or you want something beyond that?
I want something beyond that, but just as an aside, the Massachusetts story is a good one, but it's like only measuring Harvard by the quality of its students. you have the highest quality students. It's not, no disrespect to the professors here. How could you go wrong? You know, I mean, it's like you got your lights out SAT scores. Now, they're blessed to be in this place of higher learning where you're interacting with some of the brightest, most engaging minds in the world. But if you're just focusing on inputs, Massachusetts is great. If you focus on low-income Massachusetts students, not so great. Good, but not best in the country. Florida is better. That's the NAEP. This is not conjecture. These are the statistics. Low-income kids, Florida does better. Hispanic kids, Florida does better. Kids with learning disabilities, Florida does better. Massachusetts is a model, and a really good one. Has high standards and effective teachers, but their input is a little better too. Got a lot of kids that go to all these wonderful universities up here for starters. So just as an aside, it's easy to get comfortable with what you have if you think you're successful. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in Florida, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. So the idea of capping charter schools, which, just for the record here, they're public schools. They have to take all comers. This is not skimming off the top. These are independent public schools. This would be how a school would be defined 100 years ago or 50 years ago. It was school-based in terms of its management. And the difference is they're held to outcomes. And if they don't work, you can get rid of them. It seems to me that that's a better model than the traditional schools. And all the research done in places like Florida suggests that all schools get better when parents are given more choices. So I would eliminate the cap, but I would go further. I would take all the early childhood monies. There's 23 programs in the federal Head Start and a lot of other ones. It's maybe $23 billion or something like that a year. If states wanted to say, we want to do something different in a bottom-up society, I think those states ought to have that right and create an early childhood literacy strategy that would be focused on rising student achievement and rising reading scores, because without that, you're going to have these gaps. Which means in Florida, if we had the dough, we would have a 4-year-old program that would be the best in the country. We have universal pre-K for 4-year-olds in a conservative state. We would expand it with that money. We would put reading coaches in kindergarten through 3rd grade to teach teachers how to teach reading. We would end social promotion in 3rd grade, which we have, and we would have a pre-K to 3 strategy to make sure that at the end of 3rd grade, every child was literate. And I could do that in support with people in the community, with teachers, with principals, with education leaders, far better than the Head Start program or the other multitude of programs in Washington. And if you want to take it to the next step, then why not Title I and Title II? Why not voucherize the federal money if the state wants to voucherize its part? And give a voucher to families. If they want to go to a high-performing charter school or stay in their traditional public school or go to a private school, the definition of public education should not be that it's in a public school setting. It's educating the public. I mean, no other element of society is you're forcing people to go to a monopoly. We don't have state-run grocery stores. We don't have state-run anything. I mean, even the Medicaid program is basically privatized in that sense, where there are choices. In schools, the most important thing we do, we're stuck in this model that probably worked really well 100 years ago. And if schools wanted to expand the learning experience to go to 230 days rather than 180 days, so be it. And if they wanted to move to a competency-based model where if you learn the material quicker, you could move on to the next, so be it. And the money ought to move towards these innovations rather than everybody getting in line and trying to follow the dough and then be told exactly how you're supposed to use the money. Right now, the debate on the reauthorization of ESSA is on Title I. They're arguing about whether states are gaming the Title I system rather than saying, let's pause here. Why don't we just liberate this and let states that want to do it, some states may like the current system. Massachusetts probably wouldn't change. I mean, if you're arguing about charter schools, clearly you're not going to get to the Bush plan. But some states would, and Florida would be one of those. And I think the best measurement of whether Florida would be successful is, do you have rising student achievement? Is the achievement gap narrowing? Are people getting a chance to go to college? And over a relatively short period of time, you would know that.
Roland.
I want to continue on that theme just for a second. I find this bottom-up approach very interesting. I'm a little worried when you don't have governors as successful as Jeb Bush, how that works. So I'd like to understand that a little bit more. But why not push even further? I mean, I'm an economist. Why not give everyone their per pupil expenditure to homes? And why even go to the states? Why not go directly to homes and just give per pupil expenditures to parents?
Well, because you could match it with state and local dollars and get more. 90% of the money is state and local, 10% is federal. But yeah, I mean, if we were, the question
I
would be.
I didn't expect you to agree with that.
I have 1,000 little cuts on this subject, just beaten back, pushing, fighting, arguing. I'm impatient, and it's so frustrating to see how hard reform is. So from a public policy point of view, which is why you're at this extraordinary school, I think you all have a duty to challenge the people that you're interacting with to answer the following question. Because you actually have the luxury of asking this question and maybe answering it, which is, if you weren't doing it this way, how would you do it? That's a good question to ask in education, because if we didn't have what we had and we were required to create something from scratch, it would not be what we have. It just wouldn't. No one would have come up with this. And so having that opportunity to leapfrog over the legacy issues which are holding us back has to be what the next generation of policymakers do as it relates to providing economic support for people in poverty, as it relates to our criminal justice system, as it relates to how we regulate, how we tax, and how we educate. Across the spectrum, our policy is stuck in the mid-1970s. So if you're not going to rely, you can't rely on people. Well, Roland's age is a lot younger, but my age, say, 50s and up. You can't rely on us. We're stuck to the conventions that we have. You have to change that convention by challenging all of this orthodoxy, and it's not a question of money. I can promise you, $1 trillion, if you empowered people and gave them the tools to be successful, you would lessen the burden of government because they would be more self-sufficient, and they would live life in pursuit of happiness rather than being stuck and mired in the challenges they face.
And just to quickly follow up, sorry, Paul, but what do we do in the, let's call it an unlikely scenario in which there are state officials or even governors with different preferences or biases that would influence how they spent the money? I mean, does it worry you in your bottom-up approach that that things can go wrong in some states?
It worries me, but it doesn't worry me as much as having people stuck in what we have. I would, as I said, and I truly believe this, that I would trust a mom to decide where their child goes to school. I just do. I don't know.
too, but what about a governor?
Well, if you move, this is not bottom up like government bottom up. This is bottom up like empowering people to make this choice. And then you fight to keep it. Now, in a democracy, we've already seen, I see it when I get updated on the policies that we put in place, over time they get eroded. You need to have a new iteration reform. One of the reasons why learning gains in Florida, they soared. We were, just put in perspective, the 4th grade reading NAEP test, we were 29th out of 31 in 1998, and 10 years later we were 6 out of 50. And we crushed it. Well, since then, flat. Middle school, flat. Didn't get the commensurate gains in middle school. We've had higher graduation rates, but we're not nearly where we need to be. And this is a state with 57% free and reduced lunch kids, majority minority student population. Reform is never final, and success, and once you have success, it's never complete. You've got to constantly be pushing it. So leadership does matter. There's no question about it. But I'll give you an example. The corporate tax scholarship program in Florida, very controversial. We had the first statewide voucher program. This was the second, I guess, the statewide voucher program. Now 93,000 kids go to private schools with the corporate tax scholarship program. The ACLU and others are suing, but it's survived now. It's in its 12th year. Very successful. Public schools are doing better. Low-income parents are empowered to make these choices, and people's lives are being saved. I've met a lot of kids that otherwise they would have been in failing schools and would have no chance. So what happened? Well, when you get to 90,000 students, you have scale. You got moms and dads and teachers and students that say, don't take this away from me. School board, superintendent of schools, what are you suing? ACLU, NAACP? Come on, man. You're taking, this is a program that is, I think Hispanic and African Americans is probably 80% or more. Now there's a constituency. Half of the Black caucus in the Florida legislature supports the corporate tax scholarship program because there's a constituency. They march on Tallahassee. They get 10,000 people there, and they say, don't take this away from me. And by the way, it saves money, and it has better outcomes, and it's well managed. So you need to create a constituency to sustain any big idea for sure.
Well, Governor, I think it's time to open up the conversation. There's a lot of people who I'm sure have questions on their minds. We have 4 mics here in the room.
Is there a mic up there? Oh, there you are.
There's, yep. And so...
Which one? That's the green monster over there.
All right, so we can start almost anywhere. So,
hi, Governor Bush. Thanks for being here. My name is Dustin Chang. I'm a sophomore here at Harvard College. I also, through the civics program, teach government to 5th graders once a week in Boston.
Good for you.
And so my question is about, I guess, testing and accountability. So given the past, we've seen that high-stakes testing can lead to stressed-out teachers at, quote, failing schools with their jobs on the line, teaching to the test in math and English, not really focusing on other subjects or even the content itself, leaving behind, diverting resources away from students who are least likely to pass, per se. How do you think that we ensure accountability in schools while also allowing teachers to actually teach the content to all students? Is it a different form of testing, a different way of measuring it?
Great question. First of all, I can only speak with some authority on the Florida experience. We did not narrow the curriculum when we had high-stake testing. It is correct that math and reading were the 2 elements of our accountability system, and science. But the curriculum, art, for example, which is something I believe is important. My wife and I continue to raise money for scholarships for kids, and as governor, we expanded arts programs. And in the state, in an accountability system that was really the one that was targeted as the one that told everybody to eat their broccoli and everybody was stressed and all this stuff, we actually expanded arts programs. Teaching to the test, I'll refer to someone that actually knows math. It might not be a bad idea to teach the test in math because that's how you're going to learn math. If you're a good teacher, you don't teach to the test, you teach to the standards. You create a curriculum around the standards and you get a good result. So how do we alleviate this fear of testing? Because it's a pervasive thing. I think some of it's built up, some of it's mythological, some of it's real. I would suggest that we have a test that is administered near the end of the year, that is not just a benchmark of where students are at that particular time, but also is diagnostic. And that you get it back prior to the beginning of the year, and it's used as a diagnostic tool to see the deficiencies of the student. So, and it's given to mom and dad in the form of a report card, if you will, that says your son got a level what, whatever it is, level 4 or level 3 or below basic, and here are the places where, based on this test, there's deficiencies. And here's something you can do to help your teacher, Mrs. Schmidlap, who's now starting the journey with your child in September or August, and she gets the same information. In the first week of class, which used to be the norm, you have a teacher-parent meeting where you talk about developing a strategy jointly. To me, that would be the best answer, because if the test is only there to create an accountability system for the school and there's only sticks, no carrots, you can see why teachers would get really, upset. In Florida, if we grade schools A, B, C, D, and F, 100% based on learning, half to the proficiency and half to learning gains. And if there's improvement, or if school's A, they get $100 per student directly to the school, and 90% of that money goes to the school personnel. It's the largest bonus program in the country. So the other side of this is to reward teachers when there's success, because more often than not there will be.
Sir, introduce yourself, and your comment needs to end with a question mark.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Governor. My name is Sam Leichinger. I'm a junior at the college. This has obviously been a very tough election cycle for the country.
Tell me about it.
Like,
I'm going to give you a nickname like my brother does, Captain Obvious.
my dad already gave me that one. Thank you, though. It's had really damaging rhetoric, and you can speak to that too, just being on the debate stage. Yeah. Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed that the election will be rigged against him. And if Hillary Clinton wins and his supporters believe this, how are we going to heal? What do you think our leaders need to say to pacify the nation?
Fantastic question. And I think Trump only talks about things being rigged when it's not going well for him. When things are going well, all of a sudden the system looks pretty good. It's working well. I guess that's human nature. So you can measure how he thinks the campaign is going by the rapidity of whether it's rigged or not. That's a leading indicator. Irrespective of who wins, I think, given just the nature of this campaign, all campaigns are tough. I mean, history is replete of examples of, it's not the first time we've had rough and tumble campaign. This one may be different in terms of intensity. And I think the next president has an obligation, but more importantly, a real opportunity to change the culture, to have the humility to kind of figure out how other people can win for a while. It's common in American history that this has been done. It hasn't happened in a while. Look, I'm not a fan of Barack Obama's. I just don't agree with his policies. I think the one thing that people will look back on him to say the missed opportunity was for him not to do this in 2008. He won an election that was historic. He was a historical figure in so many ways. He's a phenomenal orator, gifted beyond belief. And the minute there was conflict, instead of saying like he did during the campaign, which is the reason why he won, I think, he didn't win because I'm going to pass Obamacare and Dodd-Frank and raise taxes and create, a progressive agenda, whether Republicans like it or not. He said there's no blue states or red states, only the United States. And then he didn't. Presidents they're not equal partners in this. Presidents have a unique responsibility because it's it's one person in that job, and it's the most powerful job in our democracy. And I think had he continued on with that effort and acted on it, we would have a different kind of discourse than we have today. Now, I'll be completely fair about this as well. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of pushback, and there's a lot of, talk about birthers and all this crazy stuff. But there is a duty for the next president to put that aside, to try to change the discourse, to become, as the Dalai Lama would say, more warm-hearted about these matters, because the democracy does not work when we're in perpetual gridlock. The founders envisioned it working where people had good faith, they had goodwill, they didn't ascribe bad motives every time there was a chance. And it doesn't work in this kind of current environment. So if you're a prayerful person, pray for the president, the next president, whoever he or she is, to step up and inspire us with a new form of consensus building in Washington. Great question. In fact, that is the question.
Good evening, Governor. My name is Fahim Rathor. I'm an MPP student here at the Kennedy School.
What kind of student?
MPP student, Master's in Public Policy. And like yourself, I'm a proud Floridian from Jacksonville.
Yeah?
And I have a question about schools in Jacksonville, and specifically about the magnet program. In Jacksonville, we have 2 or 3 schools like Paxton Sand that are really, really good. And then we have the rest of the public school system that people feel aren't getting the proper attention. So my question to you is, do you believe the magnet program should be expanded, or should be curtailed, or should be changed in any way?
Because Florida has big school districts, one of the advantage of big school districts is you get scale, and you have the ability to build magnets and other types of schools, School of the Arts. I think there's one there that's, I guess that is a magnet. So that's advantageous, but it shouldn't be at the expense of the broad number of students that are stuck in bad schools. I'll give you an example. You reminded me of an example in Jacksonville where because we were data-driven, I would ask the Department of Education from time to time crazy things. So I asked them, how many students are taking AP courses in the A and B schools, and how many are taking it in the D and F schools? In high schools, the grades, if you remember, were lower. They were more D's and F's than A's and B's at the time. That's been reversed a bit. And what I found was very few students were taking AP classes in the D and F schools, and a relatively high number, not enough, were taking them in the A and F schools, A and B schools. So what did we do? We did a partnership with the College Board to bring AP classes to the underserved areas, to the urban core areas and to the rural areas. And another place where we've led the nation is the number of AP test takers and passers in Florida. It's grown like 800% for African Americans since 2000. Huge gains, and same with IB now. So you're right, we should not have schools that are just elite schools and then say, well, we got a great school. It's the U.S. News and World Report says that we're ranked number 5 or something, because we have a lot of those. And then ignore the fact that you're in high school in some of these communities, better now, but still, it's not up to standards. You have outcomes where 20% of the kids are truly college ready. You may have a graduation rate of 60%, but that's a farce because they can't go to college. What's the point? Give a piece of paper that says you graduate from high school. That gives you some sense of worth, I guess. But if you can't get a job and you can't go to college, it's not particularly relevant.
Thank you.
Come home.
My name is Russell. My name is Russell Seitz, and as a sometime fellow of the Department of Physics and the Center for International Affairs here, I'd like to ask Governor Bush about his experience as a fellow of the Institute of Politics. Does it seem to him that it is today as deliberately disinterested and bipartisan an institution as it was in the days of Daniel Moynihan?
Excuse me now?
As it was in the days of Daniel Moynihan.
That is more bipartisan now?
Or less.
Less. I don't know. I'm not. Your dean is committed to making sure it's bipartisan. I've always felt welcome when I come here. Maybe I'm not watching carefully though. I think it's. Look, this is another element of life that's kind of weird in the academy, which is across this country. Our universities are places where freedom should just ring loud, where free expression should be allowed, where differing views are the reason why you're here, to grow and to learn. There are universities, not this one, but there are some universities that have great reputations that are restricting speech and making people feel quite uncomfortable if they don't have a conventional view. In most cases, sadly, that's views that are to the left. And that's ridiculous. I've never found that to be the case in Harvard, and I hope that never happens.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thanks so much for coming. I'm Dora. I'm a sophomore at the college. So Donald Trump, throughout this election, has painted America as being a very dark place, a place where there's not a lot of hope. And he's used a lot of rhetoric that's been very divisive. And it's been to his advantage thus far. But
Yep.
Tonight, you spoke a lot about a proverbial ladder into the middle class and painted a much sunnier picture. So how do you reconcile these two visions of America, and what do you think that means for the Republican Party more broadly?
I got to see how I can say this so I don't make news tonight. I might not be able to say it that way. I don't know. Look, I'm kind of old school in politics. You have professors here that follow this, and you all are engaged. Hope and optimism, as long as it's not naive and just kind of empty rhetoric, wins over fear and pessimism all the time. And the second element of this is, the reason why I'm optimistic is that I believe in my heart that ultimately we're going to have this kind of transformation, change, moving forward, where we begin to solve problems again. where there'll be emerging left-right coalitions. Education would be a good one to start, where there's a consensus that we really need to begin to solve problems. And when we do, this country is just going to kick butt. That's why I'm optimistic, because I just see the rest of the world, and you compare where we are compared to the rest of the world. If we do some simple things that no one really disagrees with, like change, this is a nerdy thing, but changing the tax code from territorial taxation to what every other nation has, which is we tax the income that's created here, you would see hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in this country. Don't tell them that would create high-wage jobs for people that right now have no hope. And the minute they believe that their lives are getting better, because it is getting better, not because there's some kind of perception about it, they've got more money in their pocket, the optimism will be restored. And I think we need to be, as conservatives at least now, we cannot win as the grievance party. We have to give people a sense that they have the power to change their lives, and the government's role is not to take care of them per se, it's to assist them to rise up. That social and economic mobility should be the right of everybody, and that earned success should be the aspiration of everybody. And to Roland's point, that the system isn't fixed for some people at the expense of others. And there's a lot of things that we could do to give people that sense. Eliminate the tax code with all the special treatment, all the, the credits and all the thing, businesses, instead of looking for broad-based reform, spend a lot of time in Washington getting their little piece of the deal. And so do other special interest groups. We need to be bigger and broader, and when we do that, I think the animal spirits of this country are still there. People still have a desire to be better and to do better. They want a better future. So call me crazy, maybe it's an old-fashioned notion, but I assume that you're at this school where you're probably paying a little more tuition than Miami-Dade Community College, because you think the future is bright and you're willing to invest in your own future to live a life of purpose and meaning. And if we can share that to more and more people, nothing will stop the United States. The Trump idea of saying that things are bad, they are bad, but not offering solutions to give people hope, that's not a sustainable message. And the other side's not much better, to be honest with you. This is I've been watching ESPN a lot more, Roland. It's hard to
No comment.
Greetings, my name's Gopal, I'm from South Africa. I'm a master's student at the Kennedy School. Welcome, Governor, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. My question is about both education and US foreign policy. In your preparation for the elections, I'm sure you would have had some time to ponder on the US foreign policy. And there has been moments in history where the US have helped the world celebrate democracy. My question, and I put it to you, is maybe the time is now ripe for the US to rebalance their foreign policy, maybe more books than guns.
Well, I think there are a lot of people that believe in, and want the U.S. security umbrella, not as the world's policeman, but as a force for peace and security. I think the proper balance isn't to be the policeman, where we feel engaged to solve problems with unilaterally engaging militarily. But one of the troubling parts of this campaign is that for the first time since the creation of NATO, we have a candidate that doesn't believe in the treaty alliance is in our best interest. That's troubling to me, because history would suggest that NATO has been an extraordinary success, and U.S. leadership really matters. But for us, who is really the question I asked. It was not successful. Again, did I mention that already in my campaign? But that traditional view is an important one for our own national security, most importantly, but for peace and security in the world. So it's not an either-or thing. We invade or we become isolationist and send books out. I think leadership requires us, for our own national security, to be engaged in the proper way. It used to be a bipartisan way. And I think restoring that bipartisanship, the old notion sounds like a cliche, an antiquated idea that foreign policy, that the political debate was on our own shores, that once we left our shores, there was a consensus about America's role in the world. Restoring that would be a pretty good idea.
Hi, Governor. My name is Cameron Consarini. I'm a junior at the college and a member of the Undergraduate Republicans Club. And I think, first of all, I'd like to say I can speak on, if not all of us, most all of us, that we wish you weren't just on the forum stage, but also on the debate stage in these next few months. We really miss you. Because God, the good Lord knows you'd be better president than both the people we have up there. But my question, My question is, from a conservative perspective, obviously believing in the power of limited government, oftentimes that the government shouldn't engage in things that are not explicitly allowed in the Constitution. What can conservatives at the national level, at the federal level, whether in the Congress or in the White House, do to improve education policy, which, as you've mentioned several times, is generally reserved for the states?
Very little. Whatever monies that exist, if you can use those monies without strings attached, to use the Federalist model. So if a state wants to continue funding Title I based on the current arrangement, fine. Fund the schools, have whatever state accountability around that money is, have the regulatory environment, which is pretty extensive. For the amount of money that the states get from Washington for IDEA money and for Title I money and the wide variety of other monies, there's a lot of strings attached and a lot of bureaucracy, a significant amount. So if you want to keep that, fine. There'll be states that will do that because they have inertia and they don't want to fight the fight. But I think states that want to try something different, a 21st century model, ought to have the right to do it. Go way beyond what this reauthorization of the law did. And it can't be done by waiver. The executive doesn't have the power to change law. So you have to go back kind of old school and how laws are made. You go to the House, go to the Senate, get it passed, the president sign it, and off you go. And frankly, there are a lot of other places where this same principle, the Federalist principle, would apply. I mentioned early childhood education. That's another place. I mean, to suggest that people in Washington are going to be better at making sure that an entering kindergartner has phonemic awareness? Come on, man. I mean, just pause and think about that. That's the most ludicrous idea ever created. But that's kind of the norm. Oh, we can't do anything about it because that's the way it is. Well, no. If we weren't doing it that way, we certainly wouldn't have Washington have anything to do with that. So why don't you let the money go? If I was in a position of responsibility, I'd say, I'll commit to you that we will do X, Y, and Z in return for the money. Just leave us, let us be, let us go do our thing. Transportation dollars. They shouldn't earmark transportation funding. It ought to be a bottom-up approach. You have a metropolitan planning agency. Lots of resources go into it to prioritize the infrastructure in a community. You don't want the bean counters and the pork barrel guys in Washington come down and say, no, you got to build this bridge here. Well, no, we don't want to build a bridge here. We want to extend the interstate there. The top down doesn't work as well as bottom up, and hopefully that'll be viewed as a 21st century concept. It is in every other aspect, isn't it? Technology is a bottom up approach. Do we have one way to embrace technology, or 1,000? Or 1,000,000. The notion that everything else works in this bottom-up approach, bubbling up, dynamic, crazy, trial and error, learning from mistakes, chaotic, that somehow that's okay. And then government is just like, we've got to do it this way, and it's like, GM, 1960, hierarchical, bureaucratic, outcome-based, never. That approach is burdening us now. It didn't when we were killing it economically, and when we were insular, the global economy hadn't impacted us the way it has, and technology didn't exist. Those big top-down driven institutions worked. They don't work anymore. And that's not a left-right issue to me. That's a 21st century model versus an antiquated model. And somehow smarter people than me need to communicate that message so that there's a left-right coalition to transform it.
All right, one last question.
Hi. Okay. My name's Alicia Khani. I'm a freshman at the college. Thank you so much for coming. I wanted to get your thoughts on how we can improve public school funding, because right now we know there's a lot of variation in how much money public schools have depending on the district they're in and how affluent that is.
Yeah. So some states have big variations, and I think frankly, there's a lot of lawsuits that are changing that over time. Florida's not one of them, and I like our model better. It's complicated. You got to be a Roland to be able to do the math on it. but it equalizes the funding. In fact, low-income schools, because they get the additional federal dollars, get on average $1,000 more than schools in the more affluent areas in Florida. So we have 67 school districts. Unlike this, Boston, I assume, has like 30 or 40, in an area that is 300, okay. Think of the extra cost of that. It's not, but it's local control, and people don't want to give it up. Yeah, but then you get the big, but you get the big spending variations because of that, unless you create a state funding formula that equalizes it. And in places where a lot of states are losing these adequacy lawsuits because of that big range in funding. I think a more equal. Look, I've already told you my view. The money ought to go with the child. Kids in poverty should get a little bit more. Kids with learning disabilities should get a little bit more. The parent ought to decide where these things go. It'll create a tension, it'll be chaotic, and people jumping, everybody will be screaming, and anybody that advocates it better put their Kevlar on because it'll be a wild ride. But you're going to create more transformational change if people have that economic power they otherwise wouldn't.
Well, thank you very much, Governor.
This gentleman has been sitting here patiently.
Okay, so one more additional over-the-top question.
Governor Bush, thank you for looking after this Florida boy from Plant City, Josh Bergen here.
Plant City.
Plant City.
Strawberry capital of the world, in case anybody's interested.
Indeed. This evening, you've laid out a robust defense case, really, for the center-right conservative cause. Many principles that, while the Kennedy School is an amazing place, I graduated in the spring of this past year, we don't hear that very often. So if the dean were to approach you and say, Governor Bush, we would like to see you play a more active role in academic life here at the Kennedy School, and with you comes Patricia Lovescu, comes Brett Doster, comes Kathleen Shanahan, I can name a dozen more. Would you consider it?
Thank you.
Are you still happy you took the question?
Well, no, I can't. But I love this place, and it's invigorating when I come. I'm actually, I can't say it because it hadn't been announced yet. So, but I like the idea. These guys are going to mess it up, so it's not that they're going to do their job, and then the people that are going to announce it won't have the chance to announce it. So I have to keep my mouth shut. But there are ways to stay involved and make a difference. And one of the things that I think this school does a good job of, and where we need a lot more focus is on the question of leadership in general, public leadership. I find it interesting. I was governor for a state, and I had huge belly flop failures and great successes, but it was like there was rewards for taking risks and doing big things. And now it just appears, whether it's left or right, it doesn't matter. There isn't that, there are people that are rewarded for good management, handling crises and stuff like that, but the big policy ideas are taking a back seat. We're not in an era of big policy conversations. And it requires a certain skill to take an idea and convert it into reality and stick with it. And I learned that through trial and error. I actually thought that skill would have huge value in the private sector, because big, sprawling, dysfunctional private sector entities look more and more like big, sprawling, dysfunctional government entities. And having the experience of dealing with all these multi-dimensional challenges that you face in government, I thought had value. And it turns out they like to get your advice, but the leadership elements they think is different somehow. And I think private sector leadership needs change as well. There seems to be a dearth in leadership in the country at a time when we really need it. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but so whatever way I can do, whatever role I can play to try to create a culture of leadership being important again, knowing how to make a decision is as important as how articulate you are about describing the problem.
So I know there are many other people here who have questions they would like to ask, but time has come to an end, and so thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you, Roland. Thanks for being with me. Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really good.